Have you ever felt completely unseen, like the world is rushing past, without noticing you're struggling to hold on? Emily once dreamed of becoming a nurse, but life took everything away from her. Homeless, alone, and invisible, until one day, everything has changed. Before we go on, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. I really need your help to reach 1,000 subscribers. Now, let's enjoy the story. The city moved too fast for anyone to notice the girl who no longer tried to keep up. She sat on the same park bench every day, nestled beneath the shadow of a sycamore tree, wrapped in an oversized coat that had once belonged to someone who loved her. Her name was Emily, though no one ever asked. To most, she was just another face in the blur of street noise and rushing footsteps. But if you stopped long enough and really looked, you'd see something different. Not just the hunger in her cheeks or the dirt on her hands, but the quiet sorrow of someone who had once dared to dream. In her lap was a faded leather notebook, corners torn, pages worn soft from constant turning. Inside it, she wrote, not letters, not survival plans, stories of people who healed, of children who found lost parents, of nurses who held strangers' hands in their final moments and whispered, "You're not alone," because that's what she used to want to be, a nurse. Before the hospital bills, before her mother's cancer, before the eviction, the broken promises, and the silence from everyone who once said, "I'll be there if you need anything." Now, she sat under that tree, scribbling with a broken pencil, telling stories no one would read because writing them reminded her she was still alive. People passed. Most didn't see her. Some tossed her coins without ever meeting her eyes. Others avoided her entirely, as if poverty were contagious. A few laughed. One woman even told her to get a job, not knowing Emily had applied to more places than she could count, only to be turned away for lacking a permanent address. That afternoon, the wind was colder than usual. The sky had turned to steel. And Emily, though used to hunger, felt the kind of ache that went deeper than her stomach, the kind that whispered, "You don't matter anymore." She hugged her knees to her chest, pulling the coat tighter around her as the first drops of rain began to fall. Her notebook trembled in her hands, and she held it against her body as if it were sacred, because in many ways, it was. She had lost everything, a home, a future, a family. But she still had her words, and that meant there was still a chance, however small, that someone someday might see her not as a shadow, but as a story worth saving. The next morning, the park was alive with the rhythm of a new day. Joggers with earbuds, nannies pushing strollers, dogs tugging at leashes. But Emily was already there, tucked into her familiar spot on the bench beneath the sycamore tree, her notebook resting on her knees. She had barely slept. The night had been cold, the wind merciless. Her coat smelled faintly of damp pavement and sleepless worry. Still, she sat upright, her pencil gliding softly across the page. Writing had become her heartbeat, slow, steady, essential. Then came the voice, tiny, innocent, curious. "Are you drawing?" Emily looked up, startled. A little girl stood just a few feet away, around 6 or 7, with honey blonde curls, big hazel eyes, and pink sneakers that sparkled with each step. In her hands, she held a juice box and a stuffed giraffe with one missing ear. Emily blinked, unsure whether to respond. Children didn't usually talk to her. Parents didn't let them. "I'm writing," she said softly. "But sometimes I draw too." The girl took a cautious step closer. "Can I see?" Emily hesitated, then turned the notebook slightly so the girl could peek. On the page was a sketch of a young nurse holding the hand of a little boy in a hospital bed. It was rough but tender, drawn with quiet care. "Wow," the girl whispered. "She looks nice. Is she real?" "She could be," Emily said. "She helps people feel safe." The girl smiled. "That's a good job." Before Emily could respond, a man's voice called out from across the park, "Olivia!" The little girl turned. "I'm here, Daddy." Emily's eyes followed the voice. He was tall, well-dressed, effortlessly elegant, in a soft blue button-up and tailored slacks. His hair was a tousled sandy brown, and his face carried both warmth and wisdom. He was holding a takeaway coffee cup, and walking briskly in their direction. Nathan Carter, millionaire, founder of a successful health tech company, widower, father, and the man who, in just a few seconds, would have his life changed by the very woman the world ignored. As he approached, his eyes locked briefly with Emily's. There was no judgment in them, only curiosity, recognition maybe. A moment of stillness passed between them, brief but unmistakable. Olivia ran to his side and tugged his hand. "Daddy, she draws stories. She's nice." Nathan looked down at his daughter, then back at Emily. "I see that," he said, his voice gentle. Emily braced herself for what usually came next, the quick goodbye, the polite thank you, the sudden retreat. But instead, Nathan stepped closer. He glanced at the notebook in her lap, then at the woman holding it. Her clothes were worn, her eyes tired, but there was something about her posture proud, even in pain, that made him pause. He smiled faintly. "Would it be all right if I sat for a moment?" Emily stared at him, stunned. "Of course," she whispered. And so, on that ordinary morning, in a city that rarely noticed the unseen, a millionaire sat beside a homeless woman on a park bench, and something neither of them expected began. The park faded around them, the sounds, the movement, the world. For a moment, it was just Emily, Nathan, and a quiet understanding that something important was about to unfold. Nathan sat with an ease that didn't match his tailored clothes or the sleek watch on his wrist. He rested his coffee on the bench beside him, hands clasped together, glancing toward the notebook still perched on Emily's lap. "That drawing?" He began gently. "She looks like someone you know." Emily looked down at the sketch, the nurse, the boy, the soft pencil lines. "I think," she said slowly, "she's who I was supposed to become." Nathan turned to her, brows lifted, but said nothing, waiting, not pressing. Emily wasn't sure why she spoke next. Maybe it was the kindness in his eyes, or the fact that his daughter hadn't looked at her with pity, but with wonder. Maybe it was just the sheer weight of silence finally cracking open. "I was in nursing school," she continued. "Second year. I had a plan, finish school, get a job, take care of my mom." Her voice caught slightly, but she didn't stop. "But she got sick, really sick. I dropped everything to care for her. Sold my laptop, took night shifts at a gas station. And when she died," she paused, staring at the pavement. Everything else unraveled. Nathan remained still, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. He wasn't scanning his phone or checking the time. He was simply listening, as if her words were the most important thing spoken all day. "I tried to keep going," she said, her voice quieter now. "But with debt, no family, no address, no one gives you a chance. And once you're on the street, you stop being seen as a person. You become an obstacle." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression didn't change. "You're still writing," he said softly, nodding to the notebook. "It's all I have left," Emily whispered. "If I don't write, I disappear." A silence followed, not empty, full. The kind of pause where two worlds, seemingly opposite, suddenly feel not so far apart. Nathan finally spoke, his voice low but certain. "You haven't disappeared, Emily." Her eyes snapped to his. "How do you know my name?" He gave a gentle smile. Olivia asked. "You told her." Emily blinked, realizing she had. "You're not invisible," he continued, "and you're not alone. Not right now." His words weren't grand. There was no dramatic music, no sweeping promises, just sincerity, real, grounded, human connection. Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him, but belief was something she'd long ago learned to protect with caution. Still, for the first time in a long time, someone had sat beside her, not to rescue, not to preach, but to see her. And that, in itself, was a kind of miracle. The sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the park. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she closed her notebook, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen after so long in the dark. Nathan sat beside her, still, calm, like a quiet lighthouse on a storm-wrecked shore. "I don't want to overstep," he said finally, "but would you and your daughter join me for lunch?" Emily looked at him in disbelief. "Lunch?" she repeated, as if the word were foreign. He smiled softly. "There's a small cafe just around the corner. Warm food, soft chairs, just one meal, no pressure. She opened her mouth to decline, not out of pride, but because her mind immediately filled with doubts. What if they stared? What if she couldn't afford even a cup of tea? What if someone recognized her as the homeless girl who sleeps behind the pharmacy dumpster at night? But before she could speak, Olivia, his daughter, returned with a daisy clutched in one hand and said sweetly, "Daddy, can Miss Emily come with us, please?" Emily looked into the girl's hopeful eyes, and then at Nathan, whose expression held not pity, but gentle patience. And she nodded. All right, just for a little while. They walked slowly, Emily clutching her worn bag, the child skipping ahead, Nathan matching Emily's pace as if time had nowhere else to be. The cafe was beautiful, warm lights, soft music, and windows that let in golden rays of late afternoon. But what struck Emily the most was the way the host greeted Nathan like an old friend, and then, without pause, turned to her with the same respect. They sat in a corner booth. Olivia colored quietly beside her father. Emily ordered a bowl of soup and tea. When the food arrived, she hesitated, not out of shame, but out of sheer disbelief that something could smell so good and be meant for her. As she took the first sip, tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. Nathan noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he spoke gently. "Emily, I want to help you." She set her spoon down, hands tightening. "I don't need saving," she whispered. "I'm not here to save you," he replied. "I'm here to offer a door that leads out of the storm, if you choose to walk through it." She looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I have a foundation," he continued. "We support transitional housing and vocational programs. I can offer you a place to stay, somewhere safe, warm, and I can help you return to school, if that's still something you want." Her throat tightened. She didn't speak for a long moment. The offer wasn't just generous. It was unthinkable. "No strings?" she asked. "Only one," he said. "Bet you let yourself begin again." Outside, the city moved like always, fast, indifferent. But inside that cafe, a woman who had been discarded by the world was finally being offered something it had long denied her, a second chance. That evening, for the first time in over 8 months, Emily unlocked a door that wasn't behind a chain-link fence or the back of a shelter line. The apartment was small, a furnished studio provided through Nathan's foundation, but to Emily, it felt like a palace. Warm light spilled across clean floors. A real bed stood by the window. The walls were soft beige, bare but welcoming, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and new beginnings. She stepped in slowly, carrying her entire life in one tattered backpack and her sleeping daughter in her arms. Layla had fallen asleep in the car, her small head resting against Emily's shoulder, completely unaware that their world had just changed forever. Emily laid her down gently on the bed. The little girl stirred, but didn't wake, only sighed in that soft, trusting way children do when they finally feel safe. Emily stood still for a long time, hands hovering at her sides. She didn't know what to touch first. The lamp? The blanket? The cabinet with real dishes inside? The silence wasn't empty here. It wasn't threatening. It was sacred. She moved like someone walking through memory, afraid the moment might vanish. Every detail, the clean sheets, the hot shower, the stocked mini fridge, felt surreal. She opened and closed the fridge twice, just to prove to herself it wasn't imagined. Later, after Lila was tucked under a quilt with her stuffed giraffe beside her, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a soft robe she had found in the closet. Her notebook lay beside her, untouched for the first time in weeks. She didn't write, not yet. She simply let herself be. She looked out the window. The city lights blinked below like scattered stars. And in that moment, the world no longer felt like a giant machine she couldn't keep up with. It felt quiet, kind. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if this peace would last, or if she could truly rebuild the life she'd lost. But for now, there was warmth. There was silence without fear. And there was the sound of her daughter breathing softly in the dark. Emily closed her eyes, lay down on the bed, and let go of the tension that had lived in her shoulders for nearly a year. For the first time in what felt like forever, she slept, and the city kept spinning. But this time, it didn't leave her behind. The morning sun spilled through the window, warm and golden, like a silent invitation to begin again. Emily stirred slowly, blinking against the unfamiliar light. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The mattress beneath her too soft, the quiet too kind. Then she saw Lila curled peacefully beside her, a corner of the quilt clutched in her small fist, and it all came rushing back. She sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair. This was real. She hadn't dreamed it. The apartment, the night of peace, Nathan's offer. It had all actually happened. But peace, as Emily knew too well, was never simple. Later that morning, a social worker from Nathan's foundation arrived. A kind woman named Miriam with warm eyes and a voice that never rose. She brought groceries, a care package, and a folder filled with possibilities. Access to counseling, school reinstatement paperwork, part-time job listings, even information about daycare options for Lila. Emily sat at the kitchen counter while Miriam explained everything. It was overwhelming, not because it was bad, but because it was good. Too good. The kind of good that made Emily's chest tighten with suspicion. She nodded, listened, smiled politely. But inside, her heart whispered, what if this doesn't last? What if they change their minds? What if I fail again? After Miriam left, Emily stood in the middle of the room, holding the folder like it was made of glass. She placed it gently on the table and walked to the mirror. She stared at herself. Same tired eyes, same shadowed face, same scars beneath the surface. But something was different. She looked less like a ghost, more like a woman, really trying to come back to life. That afternoon, Emily took Lila by the hand and walked to the local grocery store. Not because they needed anything urgently, but because Emily needed to feel the sun on her skin. She needed to walk among people not as a shadow, but as a person again. Lila skipped beside her, humming a song only she knew, stopping to admire every flower they passed. For a few minutes, Emily allowed herself to smile. But healing isn't a straight path. At the checkout, the cashier, a teenage boy, looked at Emily's worn clothes, glanced at the foundation voucher she handed over, and smirked. You one of those charity cases? He muttered. Emily froze. She should have said something, should have stood tall and snapped back. But the old shame rushed in like a wave. She took her bag, murmured a soft thank you, and walked out without looking back. Her hands shook as she held onto Lila a little tighter. The world hadn't changed overnight. Not everyone was kind. But as they stepped outside, and the breeze touched her face again, she remembered something important. She had changed. The girl on the park bench would have crumbled. But the woman walking home groceries in one hand, her daughter in the other, kept going. Because now, there was a path forward. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't walking it alone. The rain came without warning. It painted the windows in gentle strokes. The soft drumming on the glass, a lullaby that seemed to soothe the restless edges of Emily's mind. She was folding laundry clothes donated by the foundation, freshly washed and smelling of lavender, while Lila colored on the floor nearby. It had become their routine, their quiet rhythm, small moments stitched together like a fragile quilt of stability. Then came the knock, 3 firm taps on the door. Emily flinched, heart instantly tightening. Old instincts roared back fear, caution, suspicion. No one ever knocked just to say hello in the world she came from. She stood slowly, motioning to Lila to stay put. Her feet were bare, her hands slightly damp from folding. Every step to the door felt heavier than the last. When she opened it, her breath caught. Nathan. He stood under a dark umbrella, suit jacket damp from the rain, holding a paper bag in one hand and a quiet, unreadable look in his eyes. I hope this isn't a bad time, he said softly. I was nearby. Emily blinked, unsure what to say. I brought soup, he added, lifting the bag slightly. Chicken and rice. It's from that place Olivia likes. A pause. Then, I figured everyone could use a warm meal on a rainy day. Emily stepped aside. Come in. The apartment felt smaller with him inside, not in a bad way, but in the way sunlight makes a room feel suddenly alive. Nathan greeted Lila with ease. kneeling to her level, admiring her drawing of a rainbow over a tall building. "That one's our house," she said proudly. Emily smiled faintly. They sat around a small table. Emily served the soup, pouring it into the mismatched bowls they'd been given. There was a simplicity to it. No pretense, no performance. Just real people in a real moment. Nathan looked around the apartment, then at Emily. "You've made this place feel like home." She shrugged. "It's still strange, waking up and not being cold." He studied her carefully. "Is it getting easier?" Emily hesitated. "Yes," she said truthfully. "And no, some days I feel like I'm building something. Other days I feel like I'm walking through a house made of glass, waiting for it all to shatter." Nathan nodded. "That's normal." "I hate that it is," she replied quietly. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I meant to tell you something. The first day we met, when you were writing, Olivia asked me, why is she sitting alone? And I said, maybe she's waiting for someone who sees her." Emily swallowed hard. Then she smiled and said, "Well, we see her now." Silence, heavy and beautiful. Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Not this time. "Thank you," she said, "for not just seeing me, but staying." Nathan gave a small, genuine smile. "You're worth staying for." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, there was warmth. Not just from the soup, or the space, or the flickering kitchen light, but from something slowly, carefully blooming between two people who had found each other in the unlikeliest way. Not out of charity, not out of chance, but out of something deeper, recognition. The envelope sat on the table like a quiet promise. It was nothing dramatic, just a plain white folder with her name typed in bold letters across the top. But to Emily, it might as well have been glowing. Re-enrollment packet, licensed nursing program. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it. Not out of fear, not exactly, but because holding it meant something she never thought possible. A way back. 2 weeks earlier, Miriam had helped her begin the application. There were late-night phone calls, paperwork she barely understood, and endless explanations of what had happened in the years since she dropped out. But somehow, it had worked. Now, all she had to do was sign. Emily sat at the table that night, Lila asleep in the next room, the apartment wrapped in a soft hush. She stared at the form for what felt like hours. The pen hovered above the signature line, and that voice, that old, familiar one, whispered again, "What if you're not good enough anymore? What if they all see through you? What if you fail again?" But another voice, softer, stronger, answered back, "You've already survived the worst. Now let yourself rise." She signed her name. The ink dried fast, but the meaning soaked in slowly. Emily Weston was no longer just rebuilding a life. She was reclaiming a dream. The first day of class was a blur of nerves and new notebooks. Emily stood outside the community college entrance, dressed in jeans and a clean blouse donated by the foundation. Her backpack, borrowed, slightly worn, felt both too heavy and not heavy enough. Around her, younger students laughed, scrolled on their phones, hugged friends. She was older than most of them, quieter, and yet she was here. She walked through the doors like someone entering a sacred space. The hallway smelled of floor wax and fluorescent lights. The classroom walls were covered in posters of the human body, motivational quotes, and laminated charts. And when she sat down front row, second seat from the left, she felt something strange begin to stir inside her. Hope, her professor, a woman with silver-streaked hair and commanding eyes, welcomed the students. When she asked if anyone wanted to introduce themselves, Emily almost didn't raise her hand. But then she did. "My name's Emily," she said softly. "And this is a second chance I never thought I'd get." The room fell quiet, and the professor smiled. "Then make it count." Emily nodded, her chest tight with emotion. She would, for her mother, for Lila, for herself. Because this wasn't just about finishing something she started. It was about proving that she was never truly broken, only delayed. And now she was moving forward, not as a lost girl on a bench, but as a woman walking step by step back into the future she thought she'd lost forever. It was a gray afternoon, heavy with the kind of clouds that never cried, just lingered, quiet and uncertain, like they were waiting for something to break. Emily had just finished a long shift at the Foundation's clinic, where she was volunteering part-time while taking classes. Her scrubs were slightly wrinkled, her hair tied back, and a soft fatigue rested in her bones, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that reminded her she was useful again, needed, part of something. She stepped into the apartment, greeted by the familiar scent of warm rice and crayons. Lila was humming to herself at the small table, coloring the same rainbow she always drew, the one that curved over a house with 3 stick figures. This time, Emily noticed something different. The smallest stick figure now had a stethoscope. Her heart caught. But before she could say anything, she noticed an envelope on the counter. No name, no logo. Just her address written by hand, careful, practiced, familiar. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper. No return address, no greeting, just a letter scrawled in pen, the ink pressed hard into the page. Emily, I saw your name in a community newsletter. Said you're back in school. Said you're living in a place donated by some billionaire. Guess you always did know how to land on your feet. I just wanted to remind you that you don't get to run from the past. People don't change. You're still the girl who couldn't handle life, who gave up, who ran away. Don't fool yourself into thinking you deserve all this, because you don't. There was no signature. But Emily knew exactly who had written it. Him, her ex. The one who had taken everything from her, her safety, her peace, her belief that love wasn't supposed to hurt. Her hands trembled as she folded the letter, pressing it flat. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she walked to the trash, opened the lid, and let the paper fall. Then, without a word, she turned to the mirror on the hallway wall and stared at herself. She saw a woman in scrubs, a mother, a student, a survivor. She saw the fire in her own eyes, and she whispered, steady and clear, "That girl's gone. I'm not running anymore." That night, she didn't tell Lila about the letter. Instead, she sat with her daughter, coloring rainbows and houses and people with stethoscopes. She told her about anatomy class and a patient who smiled when Emily held their hand. She told her stories of tomorrow, not yesterday, because the past might knock at her door, but she would never let it back in. The night air was crisp and soft, carrying the scent of jasmine and distant rain. Emily stood on the rooftop terrace of Nathan's downtown building, dressed simply in a navy dress, borrowed from the community closet, and a pair of worn flats. Her hair danced lightly in the breeze, pinned back just enough to keep it out of her face. Below them, the city glittered like 1,000 second chances. The rooftop gathering was a small, intimate celebration for new residents of the Foundation's housing program. Nathan had insisted on it, not as charity, as an honor. "You've all earned this." String lights floated overhead. There was soft jazz playing from a speaker, trays of finger foods, glasses of sparkling water. Emily kept close to the edge of the crowd, smiling when greeted, but mostly quiet, observing. That's when Nathan found her. He approached without pretense, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened slightly a softness in his usual composed demeanor. "Not a fan of parties?" he asked, offering her a glass of lemonade. She accepted it with a quiet smile. "Not really, but the view is beautiful." He looked out over the city with her. "It is," he said, "but not the most beautiful thing here tonight." Emily turned her head slightly, catching the sincerity in his voice. "You don't have to say that." "I don't," he agreed, "but I mean it." There was a pause, not awkward but charged, like the moment before a match strikes or a curtain lifts. "You seem lighter," he added. "I feel lighter," she said, "like I'm not carrying the whole world on my back anymore. Just my part of it." Nathan nodded slowly. "I can see that." They stood together for a moment longer, the sounds of quiet laughter and clinking glasses behind them, the city breathing below. Then he asked, "Do you ever think about what comes next? After school, after the Foundation, what kind of life you want?" Emily took a breath. "I want to work in a children's clinic," she said softly. "Help kids who are scared. Be the person I wish I'd had when I was little. And I want Lila to grow up knowing she's safe, that no matter what, she'll never have to question that." Nathan's voice dropped to something gentler. You've already made her world safer, Emily. She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if what she felt whenever he was near wasn't just gratitude, but something warmer, something deeper. A spark. He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, fragile, honest, alive. But he didn't push, didn't ask for anything more. He simply said, I'm glad I saw you that day, sitting on those steps. You changed more than your own life, Emily. You changed mine too. She felt her chest tighten, but this time, not from fear, from hope, from possibility. As the stars blinked above and the lights of the rooftop cast everything in a golden hush, Emily realized something that startled her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to live. The rain returned days later, not with violence, but with a quiet persistence, like the world was exhaling. Emily stood at the kitchen counter, her nursing books open, beside a mug of chamomile tea. Lila sat cross-legged on the rug, building a castle out of blocks, humming the same melody she always did when she felt safe. Everything felt still, safe, and yet something tugged at Emily's heart. A letter sat on the table nearby, one she hadn't told Nathan about, one she hadn't even opened for a full day after it arrived. It was from a hospital in her hometown, the one where her mother had once been treated, the one where Emily had first dreamed of becoming a nurse. They'd read her recent application, reviewed her renewed academic record, and wanted to offer her a spot in their residency program once she graduated. It was a rare opportunity, one most students only dreamed of, but it came with a condition. She'd have to move back to the city where everything fell apart, back to the streets where she'd once been invisible, back to the pain. And so she stood now caught between a door newly opened and one she thought she'd closed forever. That evening, Nathan came by with Olivia. They'd brought chocolate muffins and a children's book. Layla squealed and wrapped her arms around Olivia, like they were sisters who'd never been apart. Emily pulled Nathan aside into the small kitchen while the girls played. I got a letter, she said. His brow lifted. Good or bad? Both, she whispered. It's a chance. But it would mean leaving. He didn't ask where. He didn't try to change her mind. He just waited. I could go back and prove I'm not the same girl who left, she continued. But I don't know if that's bravery or self-punishment. Nathan's voice was soft. What does your heart say? Emily looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the living room toward Lila, who was now reading aloud in Olivia's lap, her voice bright and free. My heart says she finally has a home. And so do I. Nathan smiled, something subtle and proud flickering in his eyes. I was hoping you'd stay, he said, almost a whisper. She stepped closer, something shifting in the air between them. Not because of you, he nodded. I know, but also, maybe a little because of you. They both laughed gently, the sound fragile but sincere. That night, Emily wrote a letter of her own, a graceful thank you to the hospital, and a polite but firm decline. She folded it neatly, slid it into an envelope, and let it go. Because sometimes strength isn't found in returning to the past, but in choosing to stay and build something new. And for the first time in her life, Emily chose to stay. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It was a Saturday morning when the letter arrived. No return address. Just her name in careful cursive, soft, almost uncertain. Emily held it for a moment before opening it. Her breath caught somewhere between memory and fear. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A short note. A name signed at the bottom. Her father. The man who disappeared after her mother died. The man who drank away every shred of comfort they once had. The man who left her in the world alone. I saw your name in an article about the foundation, about you. I didn't know how to write this, or what to say. I just wanted you to know I'm still here, and I'm sorry. Emily stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hand. Not long ago, she would have craved this letter, hungered for it, ached for proof that he still remembered she existed. But now, she wasn't the same girl who sat on a bench, waiting for someone to find her. Now, she was standing, whole, stronger. She set the letter down and walked to the window. The city was waking beneath her traffic, starting, coffee brewing, children laughing on sidewalks. she thought about her father, his absence, the weight of his abandonment. And then she thought of Lila, her daughter, who never questioned if she was loved, her daughter, who knew she was seen. Later that day, Emily took the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it inside her notebook, not to forget, not to hold on to, but to close the chapter with grace, not anger. When she walked to the clinic that afternoon for her volunteer shift, her steps felt lighter. She greeted patients by name. She held hands that trembled. She whispered comfort into the ears of strangers who thought no one saw them. And somewhere between bandaging a child's scraped knee and helping an elderly woman find her medication, she realized something she hadn't said aloud. She had become the woman she used to dream of being. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. She opened her notebook and began a new story. Not fiction this time, not memory, just truth. It began with a girl who had nothing, and it unfolded into a life built not on what was given to her, but on what she chose to create. The world didn't shift in some grand cinematic moment. There were no fireworks, no sweeping music, no declarations under the stars. But slowly, piece by piece, something was blooming, something real. It began on an ordinary evening. Emily had just put Lila to bed, her daughter's sleepy arms wrapped around a stuffed giraffe whose seams were beginning to fray from love. The apartment smelled of chamomile and vanilla soft, calming, lived in. She stepped onto the balcony, wrapped in a cardigan, her notebook resting on her knees. She hadn't written much that day. Her mind had been restless, distracted by something she hadn't dared name, until she heard a knock at the door. It was Nathan, not in a suit this time, not the polished billionaire, just Nathan, jeans, a dark sweater, and something unspoken behind his eyes. "I was nearby," he said with that familiar half-smile. "Didn't want to go home just yet." She stepped aside, silently welcoming him into the quiet evening. They sat together in the small living room. No wine, no music, just the sounds of the city outside and the easy rhythm that had slowly grown between them. After a long moment, Nathan spoke. "I thought I knew what my life would be," he said. "Deals, buildings, schedules. But then I saw you on those steps, and everything changed." Emily's heart stirred, unsure if it was ready, but knowing it was listening. "I didn't approach you out of pity," he continued, "or curiosity. I approached you because something inside me needed to." She looked at him now fully, her guard softening. "I was invisible to the world," she said, "but not to you." He nodded. "Because I saw myself in you, the part of me I had buried beneath money, control, image. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, how it feels to fight for your place in the world, how it feels to love with everything, even when you have nothing." Silence fell between them again, not empty, but electric. And then, carefully, he reached for her hand, not forcefully, not with expectation, just presence. And she let him. Her fingers fit into his like something quiet and steady, a puzzle finally clicking into place. No fireworks, just two hearts finally resting. They sat like that for a long while, two people who had lost so much, now finding something neither had dared to hope for. Connection, not born of rescue, not wrapped in fantasy, but built through shared truth. It didn't need a name yet. It just needed to exist. And for the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to learn, not because she was weak, but because she was finally strong enough to believe in something soft, something safe. 2 years later, the world looked very different. The apartment was no longer temporary. The furniture wasn't borrowed. The cupboards held matching plates. The fridge always had fresh fruit, and the walls, once bare and uncertain, were now filled with hand-painted canvases by a little girl who believed every corner of life deserved color. Lila's laughter echoed down the hallway as she played dress-up with Olivia, Nathan's daughter, who now spent weekends and holidays with them. Emily stood in the doorway of her bedroom, brushing her hair in front of the mirror. She wore soft navy scrubs of the kind with her own name embroidered on the pocket. Emily Weston, RN. It still didn't feel real. Not long ago, she was invisible on a sidewalk, holding her daughter while the world passed her by. Now she was preparing for her evening shift at the children's clinic, the same one that had once helped her mother, the same one that gave her purpose again. Nathan stepped into the room behind her, gently fixing the twisted strap on her shoulder. He wasn't dressed for a board meeting today, just khakis and a white button-down barefoot, at home. They're home. You ready? He asked, his voice low, familiar. She turned to face him and smiled. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. He handed her a small, handwritten note folded in half. Olivia says it's from both of them. Emily unfolded the paper. Inside was a crayon drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands. Above them, a rainbow. And below, in slightly crooked letters, we're a real family now. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from a gratitude so full it hurt. That evening, she kissed Lila goodnight, grabbed her bag, and walked to work beneath a sky painted with fading gold. As she passed the cafe where she'd once been rejected, she stopped for just a moment, not to dwell, not to ache, but to remember. The Emily who had cried on those steps was gone, not erased, honored, built upon, grown into. Now she wasn't just surviving. She wasn't just healing. She was living, loving, leading. And as she stepped into the clinic, the doors sliding open like a quiet welcome home, she whispered something only the night could hear. Thank you for that one act of kindness. Because it was never just about rescue. It was about being seen, being believed in, and choosing every single day to believe in herself. 2. Some stories don't end with a miracle. They begin with one. And sometimes that miracle is just someone who says, I see you, and I'm not leaving.